Hi, Charles' SirBookSage here, and I wanted to talk about my thoughts on the final Rings of Power trailer, since the show is coming out in about a week. Now, I've actually watched this trailer a few times now, and it actually has me thinking about how I'm going to approach actually reviewing and discussing the show itself. I have a video on my channel recently where I talk about how I'm going to approach watching it as a longtime Tolkien fan. But now the final trailer really has me kind of trying to figure out how am I going to approach actually reviewing and discussing it. There's really three main components that are going to impact having these discussions. And I figured I'd go over those three here to kind of explain where my head is at in terms of the show. The first one is we're going to have completely made up characters doing completely made up things. One example of this would be Arondir, the Sylvan Elf, and Bronwyn, the human woman who lives in the village of Tar Harad. I think it's somewhere in the south, probably near what maybe isn't Mordor yet, but will become Mordor by the sounds of it, and her son Theo. Now, it remains to be seen if Theo is their son, if he's half human, half elven. I don't know if they're going to do that. If they do, then that kid has to die, or they might make that kid one of the actual eventual ring wraiths. We'll see. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he is their son, and that's what they end up doing to him, because there isn't a fourth human-elf pairing in Middle-earth. There isn't a fourth bloodline, if you will. It would show itself. People would eventually notice, and it would stand out. And Tolkien only ever wrote 3, and they were the women were the elves, and the men were the humans in all 3 of his circumstances. So this is Amazon's come up with their own because they don't have the rights to any of those, so they wanted to do one of those stories. Now, Arondir is actually kind of the most interesting of the so far made-up characters that we're going to be getting, because Bronwyn seems to be tied to the town, the village, as does Theo, since that's her son. Halbrand seems to be caught up with Galadriel and whatever the Numenorians are going to get up to. And so Arondir, being, I guess, the elf assigned to that region to keep an eye on this humans here who in the past had sided with Morgoth. He seems to have a lot of flexibility in terms of they can move him on the chessboard a lot more than they can move some of these other characters. But we'll see. I mean, my biggest worry is the bulk of the show is going to be completely made up characters doing completely made up things. That's I'm hoping not. It should be a subplot, but not like the centerpiece of the show. That what I expect would be Galadriel, for the most part. But we'll see how this goes. I don't know if any other of the made-up characters are all like kind of their own thing, like this particular group seems to be. Though I imagine, I think there's some promo shots where Galadriel is in that town. So Galadriel crosses paths with some of these characters here. But we'll see how that goes. That's generally pretty straightforward to review and discuss, because it's either going to be done well or done poorly. It's just a matter of, is it worth your time to have a lot of screen time taken up by characters that have nothing that actually Tolkien ever wrote? We'll see. I won't really know until I start watching the show how to really feel about it. The second component is Tolkien characters doing things Tolkien actually wrote them doing. My worry is that we're going to get the least amount of this in the show, that this is going to be the smallest amount of screen time. Because if you look at the actual Tolkien characters that we know are in the show, what Galadriel's doing is completely different than what she was actually doing in the Second Age. What Miriel is apparently going to be doing is going to be significantly different. And Gil-galad looks to be about the one who's kind of closest to what he was doing in the books, at least just from the little promo material. Maybe Celebrimbor. But Elrond, they've changed significantly as well. So it's really hard to say, and we won't know until we see what like Elendil is up to, and Pharazôn. We'll see. Since they're on the island, at least to start, they kind of have to fit close to whatever Tolkien actually had them doing. So this component, the Tolkien characters doing Tolkien things, hopefully is done well. I mean, we'll see how it goes. So far, what little clips I've seen of the actors playing these roles, I generally like. The choice of Celebrimbor dressing like my grandmother from the 1970s is a bit really bizarre. I'm hoping that those are just some sort of weird ceremonial robes he's wearing for that special dinner they're having in the woods, and that's not how the man dresses most of the time, because it's so completely out of character, or at least what anyone would ever envision Celebrimbor would look or dress like if you've read anything about him. But we'll see. I am hoping it's just like ceremonial for that one like event. But again, we'll see once the show is actually out. Now, the third component is the most challenging one. And that's going to be Tolkien characters doing things Tolkien never had them doing. Case in point, Galadriel. Galadriel never went to Numenor. So never. She was never there. Tolkien never wrote anything about her ever being in Numenor. So every moment of this show where Galadriel is going to be on Numenor, and how do you even approach, as a Tolkien reader, how do you even approach reviewing and discussing that? Because, I mean, up front, you're completely wasting our time here. She didn't do any of this stuff. Why are you having her do things she never did? So, but again, I'm trying to just look at this as some loosely based sort of fan fiction, kind of sort of inspired by somebody hearing about something Tolkien wrote than any adaptation. So this really is just a character the showrunners created that they're just calling Galadriel, because very little of what we've seen is anything Galadriel was actually doing in the Second Age. So again, I guess until I sit down and watch, hopefully then I'll figure out how I want to actually review it, because it's not easy to review a character that Tolkien wrote doing things completely unrelated to what Tolkien had them doing. After watching the trailer a few times, it's starting to look like the showrunners have taken some of the things Celeborn and Elrond were up to in the Second Age, and they're having Galadriel and Miriel do those things instead. Because apparently Galadriel is going to end up in Numenor. She's going to team up with Miriel, and they're going to sail to Middle-earth and lead an army to hunt down orcs or something like that. Now, Galadriel never did any of this. Miriel, there's no indication. Tolkien never write Miriel leaving Numenor, ever. You know, we're not talking about minor tweaks. To give you an example, to put it in perspective, Fellowship of the Ring, the first Peter Jackson film. In the film, it's Arwen who finds Aragorn and the four hobbits after Frodo's been wounded at Weathertop. And she's the one who takes Frodo and outraces the ring race to try to get Frodo to her father to be healed in time before he passes into the world of shadow. In the book, it's one of the elves called Glorfindel. That's the only time Glorfindel appears in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So it makes sense from a film's perspective to put Arwen in there instead of Glorfindel, because Arwen is important to Aragorn and Aragorn's whole story and his journey as a character throughout this trilogy. So from a film point, that swap makes sense. Now, am I still salty 20 years later that I was denied my Glorfindel on live action screen? Absolutely. I will always be salty about them not having Glorfindel be the one in that scene like he is in the books. Because Glorfindel is one of my all-time favorite characters from all of Tolkien's Legendarium, because he was also around in the First Age and did some really badass stuff. So yes, I'm still salty about it, but I completely understand that kind of a change for the movie, because it just makes sense for the films. But what they're doing here isn't just swapping out one little scene because it just fits better. They're completely changing the story. And this is the degree to which they're doing. If they are indeed having Galadriel and Miriel do what Celeborn and Elrond were actually doing, this would be like the Council of Elrond, like everyone starts showing up. And Boromir comes from Gondor. And it would be like Eowyn showing up from Rohan at the Council of Elrond scene. And when the Fellowship is formed, instead of Legolas and Gimli, it would be like, no, Legolas, Gimli, you're out. Arwen and Eowyn, you're in the Fellowship in their place. And then Arwen and Eowyn get Legolas and Gimli's story. That seems to kind of be, just from what I've got looking at that trailer a few times, that's starting to feel like the kind of like massive changes they're making here. So these aren't minor tweaks just to adapt to live screen. This is like completely rewriting story and taking characters things away from characters and giving them to other characters. And Celeborn, her husband, is apparently nowhere to be found at the start of the show. Their daughter, Celebrian, nowhere to be found at the start of the show. They're going to have to show up at some point because Celebrian marries Elrond and gives birth to Arwen, who marries Aragorn later in the Third Age. So they kind of have to show up somewhere, somewhen. We'll see. This is just to give you an idea of how hard it's going to be to actually review and discuss the show. Like I said, just from a viewer point of view, I'm just unplugging my brain, just in terms of watching, that this is not any adaptation. But when it gets around to the discussion part after each episode, that's really going to be a challenge. And I'm going to have to figure out how to approach it. Until I start seeing the actual episodes, I really won't know until then. I do have to say, I'm amazed at how utterly poorly this show has been marketed. That final trailer was really not that good. That music choice was just, what in the world was that person thinking? I just don't understand it. So completely out of place for this kind of story. I will say this. We were shown, again, that little clip of Finrod screaming, yelling in battle, right? Where him and his orcs pressing around him and some other elves. If that is how this show presents Finrod dying, I'm going to just sit back with a couple of beers and just watch the outrage that is just going to sweep across every Tolkien channel that still has any actual principles left. Because Finrod has one of the most epic death scenes in all of literature. So if they take that away from him, I imagine they don't have the rights to show it. But if, rather than just not showing us how Finrod dies, they give us some cheap-ass him just getting bodied by an orc, oh man, you will see outrage unlike any outrage has ever been shown out of the Tolkien fandom to date. So we'll see. I can't imagine that they're going to change that. They just can't show it because they don't have the rights to that First Age event, I'm pretty sure. The trailer almost seems to imply that he dies there in that battle. Now, he is caught in a battle like that in the First Age where he's almost killed, and the human, Barry here, I think, and his men come down out and rescue Finrod and his small group of orcs that got basically caught in ambush and trapped. And that establishes a lifelong friendship between Finrod and that human family. So these families have long been connected throughout the ages. Aragorn comes from a line of humans that have been connected to both Galadriel's family and, again, by extension, Elrond's family. So they're all these are bonds that go back generations and generations, ages and ages. But we'll see. So I can't imagine that they're going to change Finrod's death just because they might want to show him dying when they don't have the rights to how he actually died. I won't spoil how he actually died for anyone who doesn't know. Go pick up the Silmarillion and go read what happened there. So, Rings of Power coming out in about a week. I highly doubt I'm going to enjoy it as much as I enjoyed the first episode of House of the Dragon. I'm probably going to do a separate video about discussing that show too, because I thought that first episode really did a great job, but I don't want to get off track here. I am going to go and revisit some of the Second Age stories that Tolkien has in the Silmarillion as we head towards the premiere of the Rings of Power. Last point to bring up. A lot of long-standing prominent Tolkien channels have been praising what Amazon's been doing here, which rather surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, who knows. But once the episodes start airing, it'll be interesting to see how they react, what they have to say about the actual episodes once everyone else is able to see them now. Just curious to see how that's going to go. There are things we already know from the trailers that are so far disconnected from what Tolkien wrote. And again, just to one last note, because, I can always talk about Tolkien forever. Galadriel was a penitent in the Second Age for the most part. Angry, rootin' tootin' fisticuffin' Yosemite Sam and angry elf warrior princess Galadriel, if you can get away with presenting any part of her timeline in that way, you'd have to go back to Melkor and Ungoliant destroying the trees in Valinor, and Feanor's rebellion, defiance of the gods, and Galadriel getting swept up in the emotions of that. During that period, you could probably get away with presenting Galadriel as this character in some way. Though she's nothing like this in the Second Age at all. She's far more of a penitent and spends her time like building elvish societies, ruling in Eregion, eventually establishing what becomes Lothlorien, establishing like safe like communities protected by her powerful magic, where she passes wisdom out and all that kind of stuff. That's what she's doing for most of the Second and the Third Age. So, but we're getting this angry elf, warrior princess elf hell-bent on revenging her brother's death. So anyway, I am definitely rambling now. If you're still watching this at this point, I don't know, put a book emoji down in the comments. Why not? People like to do that to see if anyone's actually still here. So if you are still here, thank you very, very much for making it this far. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the trailer. Let me know down below what you think of it so far. And one final note. Yes, there have been a lot of people saying they're not going to watch it. They're canceling their subscription, that I shouldn't watch it. And I fully respect your opinion and your choice. But this is a booktube channel, and I talk about books and story. And Tolkien is my favorite author of all time. His Legendarium is my favorite works of all literature. So I kind of feel it's kind of incumbent on me, almost like my duty, to watch this show and talk about it. Because there are going to be some people who this will be their first ever experience of anything Tolkien related. Like for Star Wars, when the Clone Wars animated series came out, there were a lot of younger people where that was their first exposure to Star Wars. They had never seen any of the movies up to that point. So all they knew of the story was that animated series as it was airing. And then that led them to explore the rest of Star Wars' world via the movies, books, and all that stuff. So there are going to be people who coming to this show where this is their first ever exposure to Tolkien. So I think me and, was it Bald Book Geek, I think might be another one, and a few others, like, this is important literature to us, and we kind of want to talk about it and want to like challenge where Amazon really changes what Tolkien was trying to accomplish. So, I mean, what's the point of having a booktube channel if you're not going to talk about like the most prominent stories? So that's kind of my response to people who are trying to say don't watch it at all. I fully respect your opinion, but kind of feel it's kind of like my channel's purpose. So I'll be watching, and I'll be ripping to shreds what deserves to be ripped to shreds, and I'll be pointing out the things that they're actually doing well, because some of the visuals are going to look beautiful and stunning. It's like, will that outweigh a horribly done story? Because some of the things that I'm hearing that they're going to have take place in this is, it's going to be rough. But we'll see. Anyway, that is way more than enough. If you're still here watching this, I don't know. Drop, I don't know, an ice cream cone emoji if there is such a thing. I don't know what emojis there are on Twitter, on YouTube. I don't really ever use them. But anyway, I'm going to go now. Otherwise, this is going to become as long as the Silmarillion itself. And I'm going to go eat. I am Charles, the SirBookSage. Happy reading.